We are super excited to be joined today with award-winning civil rights lawyer and founder and executive director of Civil Rights Corps, Alec Karakatsanis, and fellow Turner and executive director of Radio Milwaukee, and my frequent workout buddy downstairs, Jordan Lee. Alec Karakatsanis' new book, Copaganda, How Police and the Media Manipulate Our News, is an incredible read, and it's already causing controversy right here in Milwaukee. Most of us are familiar with cultural propaganda, like the TV shows that promote hero cop narratives, like, think Law and Order, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but we don't necessarily realize how much propaganda is insidiously baked into our daily news media. And whether it's nightly news crime stories or disproportionate coverage of issues like street takeovers or articles that only seem to quote the police or the police union city officials, it's everywhere. And the news gets fed to the media by the police in a nice little package. The media reports on specific types of harm in specific ways, and the public and local officials demand change based on a narrow, punishment-centered form of consequences. But with a little critical thinking and pushing back on news media and law enforcement, we can begin to envision a world centered around true accountability by addressing the root causes of societal issues instead of ineffectively treating just the symptoms. With that, I'd like to pass it off to my good friend, Jordan Lee.
Give Emilio a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. He's a natural talent. He talks like that in the gym downstairs. This is not like a show he puts on. This is Emilio 100%. I'm honored and welcoming you. I'm honored to welcome you all. Those of you who are here physically, thank you. And those of you who are here virtually, it's great to have you with us as well. I'm Jordan Lee, fellow Turner and executive director of Radio Milwaukee. And Alec, I want to welcome you to Milwaukee. Let's give Alec a round of applause. The most beautiful city in the world, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So Alec, true or false, you actually coined the phrase Copaganda.
False.
False. Okay, so tell us how this word came into your vocabulary.
I have no recollection. I have used it a lot, though.
Yes, well, to the point where you titled the book.
That's right.
So for those of us in the room who have maybe not read the book yet, or for those of the viewers who have not read the book yet, can you define Copaganda in a clear example? A little bit was outlined by Emilio just now, but I wanted to hear it in your words. Like, what is Copaganda?
So first of all, thank you so much for hosting and for that question, and just for everyone for coming, and to the amazing hosts. A couple people from here, I think Chrissy and Emily, drove down to my book event in Chicago months ago and said, will you come to Milwaukee? And so I think this event has been in the works for months. And I'm really excited to be here. It's my second time in town. Maybe when I'm signing your book, you can each give me a recommendation for something I should do while I'm here. I'm really excited to be here. And in terms of coining the phrase, I'm not averse to being given credit for things that I haven't done. So, I mean, if you want to leave here thinking that I coined it, then that's great. But I did not. So I think for me, I have a really particular understanding of the term that, well, first of all, can everyone hear me? There's a little bit of an echo for me, but we're good? Okay. I have a little bit of a unique, maybe, understanding of the term, and as I use it in my book, I think I'm really talking about a concept that has three main functions. The first function is it narrows our conception of safety and threat. Okay, so if you follow a lot of news, the news will have you really, really, really scared about the supposed crimes associated with poor people, with people of color, particularly black people, with strangers, immigrants, et cetera, right? Strangers is a really important and big one, right? Because most interpersonal harm in our society, most physical violence, most sexual harm is actually not perpetrated by strangers. It's perpetrated by people who know each other. This is a really uncomfortable fact for the punishment bureaucracy, which is another term that I use in the book we can talk about a little bit. It's really an uncomfortable fact for them because nobody thinks that police, prosecutors, and prisons are the best way to deal with harm caused by people who are in relationship with each other. And that is most physical harm in our society, most sexual violence in our society. So having narrows our conception of threat to those things while ignoring far greater threats to our health, well-being, and safety. For example, wage theft, which is about $50 billion a year. That's like 5 times all of the property crime that the police record in the United States combined. Tax evasion is like $1 trillion a year. It's hard to even understand how big that number is. It's like 60 times all of the property crime that every police officer and federal agent in the country records combined every single year. Air pollution kills 100,000 people in this country alone every single year. That's about 5 times all homicide combined. There are millions of illegal acts of air pollution every single year. Same with water pollution. We record and document hundreds of thousands of water pollution crimes every single year. Intentional spewing of chemicals into the groundwater, into the soil, causes untold death and suffering among people across the country, right? This is not the kind of, you don't see mugshots of people who spew chemicals into the water supply every single night on the local news. So Copaganda narrows our conception to focus on what the police really call index crimes, which are even a narrow category of things that are criminalized. The second thing Copaganda does is, after it's narrowed our conception of what safety is, it has us constantly concerned that narrow range of harms is increasing all the time, right? So every single year when they do these polls, people say crime is up. When in fact, every single year for the last few decades, except for one, crime is recorded by the police has been down. So much so that we have historic lows right now in police recorded crime. Interestingly, when you look inside those polls, when people are asked about their own neighborhood, they're much more likely to be accurate. So they're much more likely to say, well, my neighborhood crime's not up, but everywhere else crime is really up. So when their experience is based more on their personal experience, it's still distorted for reasons we can talk about, but it's actually much more informed. They become less informed by watching the news, okay? And then the third thing, which I think is probably the most important feature of Copaganda, is that having narrowed our conception of threat and made us really, really, really scared of that narrow range of threats, Copaganda tells us that the solution to all of our fears is always more and more and more and more investment in the punishment bureaucracy. No matter what the problem is, even if the problem is sexual and physical assault by police and jail guards themselves, the solution is, well, we need to spend more money on training and technology and more guards, right? Every single problem is framed as needing more government repression, surveillance, punishment, etc. And this is kind of like a modern flat earther movement. It's completely divorced from all of the empirical evidence that we know.
Right.
Across the United States, across the world, what the research shows, and this is maybe the most important feature of Copaganda, the research shows that the things that affect how much we hurt each other in any given society are big structural features of that society and culture. Things like levels of poverty and inequality, access to healthcare, early childhood education, housing, levels of loneliness and isolation and community involvement and sort of civic institutions, toxic masculinity, exposure to environmental toxins like lead. I could go on and on and on. These are the kinds of things that actually determine how much people in a given society hurt each other, not like, are there 14 cops on this patrol or 11? Or is the punishment for that crime 23 years or 18 years? Like, these things have nothing to do in any meaningful way with like the levels of violence and harm in our society. And that's, to me, Copaganda.
So you just talked about 23 years versus 18 years, and you mentioned this phrase a few times as punishment bureaucracy. I think we needed to define that for the crowd as well and understand a little bit more what you mean when you say that and what does that have to do with this whole system.
So this is actually what my first book kind of gets into in more detail. I think they're also selling the first book out there. It's called Usual Cruelty, and the first essay in that book is called The Punishment Bureaucracy. For me, a lot of people use the term, have you ever heard the term criminal justice system?
Sure.
This is a term of propaganda that was concocted, over the sort of mainly over the second half of the 20th century, in order to convey that either the purpose or the effect of this system is to do justice.
Right.
I don't use that term because I don't think either the purpose or the effect of this system is to do justice. So for me, I think the punishment bureaucracy is a more accurate term to describe what this system is doing. And by the punishment bureaucracy, I'm actually referring to a much larger constellation of entities. So it's the public sector entities that you think of immediately: police, prosecutors, probation officers, parole officers, prison guards, et cetera, all of the unions that represent them, et cetera. But then also there's at every single stage of this system, there are private entities that have become sort of parasitic on this bureaucracy that operate for profit. So the multi-billion-dollar bail industry, the multi-billion-dollar prison and jail telecom industry, the multi-billion-dollar surveillance industry. There are companies that make the handcuffs and the cages and build the prisons and the jails. And there's now all of the medical care inside jails and prisons have been privatized, right? I could go on and on and on, you get the point. At every single stage, there's all of these. So for me, the punishment bureaucracy is a term that kind of covers this entire constellation of entities that combine to sort of metastasize, and if left to their own devices, will always be increasing because that's what these kinds of systems do.
So let's get into the media. Now, I work in the media, public media, but still the media, and
Sorry
I want
to hear
to. Thank you. Yes, our fund drive is going really, really well right now, Radio Milwaukee. So Milwaukee is stepping it up. I'm proud of that. I spoke at the Rotary Club in February, and I said to them that I didn't want the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to continue to be with their thumb on the scale of what we've done. And then a month later, I found out that they were going away. But that's good. Milwaukee's funding Milwaukee, and that's good. And media outlets who identify as more progressive still contribute to the perpetuation of this propaganda. So is there an inherent nature of crime reporting and all of this that like we just, in the media, we just have like enlisted the wrong skill sets? Like what's the root cause of all of this?
I think you get at a really important point. We're talking about progressive media versus other kinds of media. So this particular book, Copaganda, is not about the right wing. It's not a book about the far right. It's not a book about the particular segment of the propaganda ecosystem that, companies like Fox News or Newsmax participate in. This book is actually an intervention on what you might call the mainstream or the left. What I would call maybe in our moment the kind of segment of society that is potentially gettable into an anti-fascist coalition. Okay, so this book is speaking to those people who at least will claim and sometimes even feel that they want to live in a society that is more equal and more just and more safe and all sort of the liberal values that our society has long articulated. Institutions that kind of have those values, that's what this book is about. And this book is really about how those institutions, particularly the news media, but also there's a chapter on academia, there's a chapter or a couple chapters on academia. I talk a lot about nonprofits, I talk about philanthropy, really all these kind of mainstream liberal institutions. This book is about what is the role that those institutions have played in our authoritarian moment. How are those institutions contributing to this kind of fear and to the distortion of our sense of safety and ultimately to the kind of climate science denial-like idea that the solution to any of these problems is more state repression. So the news media on the sort of progressive left and the center and the mainstream is just as guilty of this, if not more, than the far right ecosystem. And when I talk about the far right in the book, which is rarely, I'm only doing it to show you that the outcome and effect and role of like the New York Times, let's say, is identical to what Fox News is doing, but they're just using different tactics designed for a different audience that work on a different audience. So I think maybe every chapter in the book is really an attempt to get at your question, because I think it happens at every single level from the first thing, like what is news, right? So even the decision about what stories to cover and what stories not to cover is a really important propaganda moment, because like every single night on the local news, someone is making a decision. There were 10 million things that happened last night. Which 12 to 14 am I going to tell you about? And which ones am I not going to tell you about at all? So just the act of setting the agenda is enormously powerful. And you can do a lot with that. And as I talk about in the book, the very best propaganda and the most effective propaganda, particularly arrayed against well-meaning people, and liberals and educated people, sort of the intellectual classes. The very best propaganda is propaganda based on true facts. It's the curation of those true facts to create false impressions, which is the sort of hardest propaganda to counteract. And so I think like the first thing would be like, what is news? The second thing is like, well, among those stories, what kinds of decisions are you making about what context do you provide? What context do you not provide? What sources do you use? What voices do you hear from? Which voices do you ignore? What words do you use? How do you frame it? These are all decisions that are made. And every single news story you see, there's a bustling world underneath that story. You had to ask yourself questions like, how did this story come to this reporter right now? Why is this news? Who benefits from this being news? Who benefits from the word choice? Who benefits from who's included in the story? Who benefits from who's characterized as an expert in the story? Who's like benefiting from the word choices? And these are all the kinds of questions that I kind of work through article by article with examples in my book, just sort of help us think about how to approach the news in a more critical way.
Thank you. Alec, I want to ask you a favor for our streaming friends, if we could bring the mic a little closer to your face. You have a beautiful theater voice, and you would do well in any Shakespearean performance with that beautiful pipes of yours, but our friends online are just not hearing us as well, so we're going to speak a little closer. All right, so let's take it to Milwaukee. The Milwaukee Police Department has begun highlighting the use of surveillance technologies like facial recognition technology as an individual quote-unquote success story of quote-unquote catching criminals. Seemingly, this response has had significant public pushback after they hid their use of facial recognition technology for many, many years here in Milwaukee. So, how does Copaganda play a role in pushing for increased police surveillance and justification of their budget lines, and how might we in Milwaukee push back?
There's so many answers to that question.
We have time.
Yeah. I'll try to be really
I'm very comfortable right now, Alan.
I'll try to be really brief, but so at a really, really high level, the more afraid you can make a population, the more pliable they are, and the more willing they are to agree to authoritarian measures. The more willing they are to sacrifice certain basic liberties and freedoms for safety, right? Or as so happens in our culture, for perceived safety, because actually all of these systems are making all of us less safe. That's what the evidence shows. So, at a very, very high level, Copaganda is creating a series of moral panics, one after another, that sort of work people up into a frenzy, that get people really, really, really scared about any number of things. Like I said in the beginning, typically that fear is directed at the most poor, marginalized, vulnerable people in our society, right? It's not directed at the companies that are spewing toxic chemicals. It's not directed at landlords. It's not directed at police. It's not directed at people who wield power in our society. So at the high level, we're constantly being made afraid. That's the most important thing, because all of this stuff is happening at the level of emotion.
Yes.
It's not happening at the level of rational argument and evidence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The second thing is these technologies and investments are framed in a way that completely hides their true agenda, their true motives, the processes by which they come to be. I actually wrote a separate piece called The Body Camera, The Language of Our Dreams, which you can read for free online, and which actually they just published for some reason as a book in French. So I was just in Montreal doing French events for this book. Well, I don't actually speak very good French, but I was talking in English and people were translating it. But that which I summarize in this book, I didn't have room for it because the publisher, I had submitted like a 600-page manuscript, and the publisher was like, "No one's going to read this," and I was like, "Judging by my last book, no one's going to read it anyway, so we might as well put everything in here." But they prevailed, and we removed all the body camera stuff. But I think the body camera, like this facial recognition example you asked about, and the two of them are, by the way, very related, is the most significant achievement of police propaganda in modern times. And I think it's worth getting into the example a little bit, because I think it helps answer some of these questions about police budgets, about propaganda, about technology, about investments. So for years, the multi-billion-dollar police surveillance industry and police leadership, notice I say leadership because at the beginning, a lot of rank and file officers did not want body cameras.
Yes.
Okay? Yes. But police leadership and the multi-billion-dollar policing surveillance industry desperately wanted them. Yeah. And they wanted them so badly, they were going to kind of extreme measures to get them. They even got Steven Spielberg and others to donate money so that police foundations raised money and gave free body cameras to police departments like the LAPD, et cetera, before they could get public buy-in for these things. Slowly, they actually convinced the rank and file cops that this was actually a really, really good thing for them. And then another huge driver was that prosecutors wanted them so badly.
Yeah.
Okay? So it's really important to understand why, because you have to understand, why are these entities in Milwaukee pushing for facial recognition? Why do they care so much about it? Okay? Who's behind all this? So in the context of body cameras, there were a group of interests, but essentially all of them agreed on maybe like 4 major things that they wanted. Number one, they wanted to dramatically expand surveillance in our society. They wanted hundreds of thousands of cops to have mobile surveillance cameras that the police themselves controlled. When they turn on, when they turn off, what they record, right? Keep in mind, these cameras look outward, away from the body of the police officer. So most of the viral videos that have gone famous, that have caused a lot of uproar in US history, Rodney King, the George Floyd incident, Eric Garner, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are not body camera videos. Even Tyree Nichols in Memphis, where there was some body camera footage, the definitive footage was actually away from the cops, looking at what all the cops were doing. Right? So very important. And when the cops use body cameras, obviously they're trained on how to use them and they set the policies on when they're turned on and off. But they're also trained to do things like, from off camera, they say things like, stop resisting, stop resisting, stop resisting, right? I'm sure you've seen some of these videos. They're also affixed on the chest of the cop. There's a reason that, like, if you've ever watched a movie being made, they have elaborate apparatuses to make the shots stable, right? Yeah. What the cops love the body camera because it creates this really chaotic picture, which serves one of the most important police narratives, that it's an inherently dangerous job, it's chaotic, everything's happening so fast, so we had to shoot them, right? This body cameras actually further that narrative. Police also wanted them for liability purposes, but this is the 2 key ones. Prosecutors understood that they could decide when and how to use this evidence. And they understand something very important that I talk about in my first book, which is that the current criminal punishment bureaucracy in the United States would completely crumble if it couldn't get most people to plead guilty really fast. We're arresting over 10 million people every single year. The Constitution was not designed for a system of mass human caging. It would be utterly impossible in our society for everyone who's arrested to get a lawyer, someone to investigate their case, file motions, to have enough prosecutors, do enough judges, to have a jury trial. Can you imagine impaneling 10 million juries every year? Everything would crumble. So what they needed was more ways to get really good evidence in low-level cases, because the vast bulk of criminal cases in the US are trespassing by unhoused people, drug possession. These are the kinds of things that prosecutors knew they could use body cameras for, so they could get people to plead guilty really fast. They wanted leverage in their cases. They wanted to be able to come to the person. And what do prosecutors do with leverage? Well, they get longer sentences. Yes. And they are able to coerce you to say, look, plead guilty today, pay a fine, which we then use to fund our system, right? And go on your way. And by the way, you're caught on video, so you might as well. Like, what's the point in fighting this case? Okay, that's why they wanted them. Yeah. Also, police understood they could go to any neighborhood and scan with their body camera and link it to new facial and voice recognition software and see which people know each other. This is very important, the police thought, for their so-called gang investigations and their gang databases, et cetera. They could go to any protest and scan the crowd and see who's there, who knows each other, right? Very important stuff that came from the US military counterinsurgency manuals, okay? So the companies were just salivating, right? Yeah. Because they saw, if you start recording millions and millions and millions of interactions, someone's gonna have to pay for that cloud storage. Yep. Someone's gonna have perpetual contracts for training. Someone's gonna have to buy AI algorithms to review all of this stuff. Someone's gonna have to train they were always looking for more stuff to train the facial recognition stuff on. Anyway, I think you guys get the point. There's much more I could say. They really wanted this stuff. They had a problem. They couldn't get Democratic Party-controlled local governments across the country to agree to give the police all of this power and technology. So what do? They had this brilliant idea after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, and there was a public uproar, and there was no video, and they were like, you know what? We could just switch strategies. We could pitch the body camera as a tool of accountability and transparency. and they got Barack Obama on board, and they got Eric Holder on board, and they got Democratic Party officials all over the country who are always looking for an excuse to back the police. And they then got one of the most significant expansion of police surveillance in modern history. And hundreds of millions of dollars a year started flowing into this. And it's important also for Copaganda because police understand better than anybody else the concept of virality. Now they have so many cameras and they're linked with facial recognition. They can sort of determine who is involved and how and why. And they can make really quick decisions. Should this video go viral or should we bury it? So, for example, the video of Laquan McDonald being murdered by police in Chicago was buried for years until after Rahm Emanuel's re-election campaign, et cetera. A judge finally ordered it released. But if there's a video of an undocumented immigrant getting into a street fight, it's on Fox News within like 2 hours. They understand virality. Virality is absolutely vital to modern propaganda. If something goes viral, tens of millions of people can see it. If something doesn't go viral, it doesn't even register in the cultural consciousness. This is why the police in cities like Milwaukee are so interested in all of this technology. Facial recognition, predictive policing algorithms, body cameras, license plate readers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, you actually segued perfectly in the next question I wanted to ask is like, those of us who are here tonight, we're choosing to stay informed and want to get engaged. Those of us who are streaming online and listening to this later, we're choosing to get engaged and stay informed. But how do you suggest, Alec, that we get this important information to be shared more broadly with the impacted communities, with those who are not thirsting for knowledge, with those who just need to know what's going on, considering they have phones, they have access to information, but they're not going to buy your book?
Well,
I'm sorry.
I hope
I'm
they
just
will.
saying, what I mean by that is not, they don't know it even exists. There we go. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Sorry, that sounded, I really didn't stick the landing on that question. But you know what I'm saying. We all have a friend, we all have a neighbor, we all have a cousin, we all have a loved one who's not going to get this information. They're not going to process it well. And I want to think through, you've been on the road, you've been talking with communities all over the nation, and how do we do better to share this information?
Well, I'm sure everyone in this room is going to get the book for their cousins.
There we go.
And their and I'm confident that everyone who knows this book exists is going to get it. Actually, this is a good time for me to just side note say all of the royalties for this book go to an incredible organization. None of them go to me. They go to an organization called the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, which is an organization that works with unhoused people in the Skid Row neighborhood of LA. It does some of the best police surveillance work that I know of. And then separately, if you're interested, you should definitely buy books from your amazing local store here. If they run out, or if you want to get bulk books, I can get you a big bulk discount directly from the publisher if you want to get them for your friends and family and frenemies and enemies. And also, we have a charitable fund that we've set up that anybody can donate to that makes sure we have free copies of the book. And the free version is this paperback version here. So if anyone can't afford the book, I'll buy you one, but also you can also have my travel paperback copy. The free book is a paperback because it's free for anybody in prison in the United States. So if you work for a Books to Prisons program, just let me know. We'll send as many books as you want into any prison that you want. They're also for teachers. So if you know any teachers at the high school or college, actually there is like a middle school math teacher who's been teaching this book. I have no idea how or why. But if you're a really creative, like middle school math teacher, you could do it too. But really high school, college, graduate school, we can get free copies for your students if you think your students can't afford it. So the idea is just to get the, so hopefully more people will read it than you're anticipating, although I suspect you're probably right. So now to actually answer the spirit of your question.
Emilio uninvites me to all forums at this point forward.
By the way, am I speaking better into the microphone now? Okay.
Yes.
So, I don't purport to actually have the answer to this question because the question that you're asking is really about the political economy of media and information dissemination and how do we do political education work in general in our society right now? And these are really profound and really difficult questions, especially just within this week. TikTok was was purchased by
Right.
people precisely because people with a lot of power and money were getting really concerned about the potential role of TikTok in politicizing and radicalizing some people.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so these sort of like mechanisms for information dissemination in our society are becoming more and more centrally controlled in the hands of fewer and fewer people. So your question is a really urgent one.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have a few thoughts. Number one, and I have a whole chapter at the end of the book called Resisting Copaganda, where I get into more detail about all these ideas. The number one thing that I would say is you can't do it alone.
Yes.
We all have to do it together. We have to get involved in groups, whether it's critical book clubs and reading groups and study groups, whether it's other kinds of community formations. I'm a big fan of things like participatory defense hubs. And my mom, for example, when she retired, joined a local court watch program. And so my mom watches court and documents what's happening, reports it out to she sort of has become a journalist for what happens in court, right? She actually does this with Fiona Apple. Somehow, I don't know how Fiona Apple got involved in this, but cool. These things lead to really amazing, like my mom's observations with her group in Pittsburgh led to multiple federal civil rights cases and lots of journalistic stories. Fiona Apple did a whole song on the bail system that she learned about from watching court. The participatory defense hubs where the families of people going through the system get together and they learn and they share information and they teach each other and then they build alternative options for the courts to consider about how to handle these cases. Those are really important interventions. Then also we've been thinking about how do we organize, I call it source organizing. Mm-hmm. So a lot of local news organizations are struggling with budgetary cuts and staffing and the police make it really easy, as I have a whole chapter in the book that shows you that, like the LAPD and the LA Sheriff's Department, for example, have 67 full-time officers doing PR. Yep. And these people literally produce the news. Yep. They don't just send you a paragraph. They send you audio, video, charts, graphs, people to interview, experts, right? So we can start doing our own kind of stuff in the community about that, right? Yeah. We have lots of people in our communities that have really important stories about public safety to tell. Yes. So we've started working with journalists around the country, and we've created an organization that I talk about at the end of the book called the Center for Just Journalism, which helps connect people with different skills, roles, experiences in the community to local journalists. So if you are a person I was in Madison last night, and someone who came to the talk happened to be a local regulator who tests environmental sites. So it turns out what we've seen around the country is people love news stories that tell them which playgrounds around town have tested for various levels of lead. Parents love those stories. It's a myth that you have to have a mugshot of a poor person or a black person in order for people to tune into the news. It's just not true. What I've seen and been suggesting to a bunch of journalists is instead of camping an officer out at the police station, put them in housing court and have a bad landlord of the day segment. Put a mugshot of a landlord. People love hearing about the really weird stuff landlords do to people, to other renters, right? And actually that helps us start directing our understanding of what's happening in communities at people who have power over these systems. So bad landlord of the day, bad employer of the week, talking about employers that are forcing employees to work in illegal conditions or stealing their wages. So these are ways to get, and we've been able to connect teachers, principals, nurses, doctors, directly impacted people, public defenders, all like coders, artists. There's so many people that have ways to contribute to producing news stories in the way that the police have been doing them. And so you can form these groups in your local area, and you can actually change what goes on the local news. Just by now, unfortunately, we don't have a multi-billion-dollar budget like the police do for public relations. Right. So this is going to have to be something we do together. But this is a way to get involved at a time of rising authoritarianism. This is a way we can all get involved in our communities, and we can get different stakeholders and different people with different perspectives and skills in our communities involved in producing different kinds of news. And then this helps us get other people who maybe are disengaged involved in news stories. And then we can have little community forums, we can show those stories. One thing I'm working on, for example, which I'm interested, if anyone's interested in bringing this to Wisconsin, is we have some cases in Michigan that are we're trying to establish a constitutional right for children to hug their parents, okay? Because many jails around the country, including in Wisconsin, have gotten rid of family visits at local jails. And the idea behind that was the private equity firms that own the prison and jail telecom industry give a kickback to the sheriffs. The theory is that if you stop families from visiting for free in person, they'll spend more money on phone and video calls. So we think this is illegal. And so we're asking state courts around the country to set up a new doctrine that says you have a constitutional right to this, and the state can't deprive it unless they have really, really good reasons. And by the way, making money is not a good reason. It's very subversive stuff, but because it helps undermine the idea that what these people are doing is about public safety.
Right.
These systems are not making these decisions about public safety. Actually, it increases crime to separate families like that, and we know from the evidence. So an exciting project in terms of getting people involved is we're working with teachers around the country to develop a curriculum for middle school and high schoolers about family visitation in jail, about the underlying causes of it. And then we're working with their local school newspapers and teachers and classes to do reporting on what's happening in their local community. And they can do the interviews, they can do freedom of information requests. They can also use this to learn about racial justice and mass incarceration, to learn about the legal system and the law and the Constitution. Like it's a really engaging, young people really care about this issue. When a lot of them are going through it themselves, or they've been through it, or they have friends that are going through it, right? And it's also a way to engage their parents, because the kids start talking about it at home, et cetera. And then we can publish the stories that these journalisms, like high school newspapers do. We can cross-publish them with local newspapers. Local TV news can do segments on them. It's very popular. TV news loves these stories, like following a group of kids who like went to the jail and like interviewed the sheriff and like put him on the spot, right? So that's just an example. I could give you many other examples, but these are the kinds of things that can be scaled up, because you could do this at every school in Milwaukee. Yeah. Private schools, public schools. Right. These curricula can be just, and I think there's lots of teachers that are interested in this, and it's a way of getting young people like back engaged. Yeah. Also, the other thing that's really interesting is what I've seen is that when you show young people this kind of policy, and then you show them like the news article that announced like Milwaukee ending family visits at the jail. Right. And you can show them that like the real reasons for that policy were not reflected in the news story, right, which is really powerful, because the news is constantly telling them, like the New York Times slogan is all the news that's fit to print. You're told that what you're reading is everything you need to know. Yeah. And then these students have this realization for themselves. They're saying, wait a second, we now know why this happened. But when the local news reported it, they didn't even tell us this stuff. Yep. And that's a really powerful and I think important kind of moment of political education and critical thinking.
Thank you, Alec. I want to remind those of you in the room, if you're starting to formulate your own questions, reach out to our friends in the back. They'll help you get them together for me. And also those of you on the stream, chat it up. Let's get it going. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about how the media always seems to champion police unions. It seems like their lobbyists are involved in all sorts of anti-community, anti-safety lobbying, like Wisconsin's Act 12, asking the president to send national troops to Milwaukee because of children's driving. So should the public view police unions and associations separately from the police themselves?
Well, the police unions are a slightly different formation. Yes. That have different incentives and interests. I mean, broadly speaking, they are aligned with the general interests of the punishment bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit of a misnomer to call them unions, but they are an instrument of the sort of ruling class elite. Mm-hmm. They have also been organized and radicalized, politically radicalized. So police unions generally are very far-right political formations. They, in order to sort of serve the function that they serve, they have adopted a number of really radical political positions with their membership. And they have different accountability structures than local police departments, et cetera. And they are also playing a really important role because they are sort of a way in which mainstream politicians can kind of evade responsibility for policies that, let's say, serve the interest of real estate developers or other people locally, because they can always blame the contract with the police union and et cetera, et cetera. And so they have this kind of symbiotic relationship with the liberal ruling class elite in any one of these large cities, but they also play a really, really important political function. Yeah. they, behind the scenes, do a tremendous amount of political work. They organize their members generally to either subtly, like on patrol, infuse political commentary into the, so for example, if there's a progressive DA or something, you might have patrol people with talking points from the union. When they respond to a call, they'll say something like, well, we're not able to make this arrest because of the progressive DA, or nothing's gonna matter anyway, they're just gonna dismiss the charges, so we're actually not supposed to do this, or we can't do our job. So they have actually really effective coordinated messaging because they have so many touch points with people. So police unions are able to do stuff like that the police bureaucracy itself is not able to do. They can do kind of political action with their members in a way that is harder, at least, for some of the regular police bureaucracy to do. And they serve as kind of a far-right check on the police bureaucracy. So if the police starts giving too many concessions to the general public, the police union can organize really effective responses. So I've interviewed many dozens of progressive officials around the country over the years about this. Judges, prosecutors, attorney generals, Supreme Court justices in different states, city council people, mayors. Every single one of them who has taken what is perceived as an anti-police position has been privately threatened by local police. This is impossible not to be coordinated, right? So it usually takes the form of pulling over at a traffic stop and a comment like, oh, nice new car you got your son. Or, oh, it'd be a real shame if your daughter got pulled over on her way to prom next week, or things like that. Yeah. Or home raids, right? So some of the leading politicians in Los Angeles had their homes raided by the sheriff when they were in a budget fight. Searches, illegal arrests, you name it. I talk about it a little bit more in the book. This is something that no one ever talks about. But I guarantee you, if you have a progressive politician in your community and they're thinking about a big fight with the police, everyone is worried about this. Everyone behind the scenes talks about it. Judges talk to me about it every single time we talk about these issues. Wow. Everyone is afraid of it. This is coordinated political action that is happening at the police union level. Yeah. And it's not just the police union. There are different factions within police departments and police unions. Different, like, if you look at the incredible reporting on the gangs within the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, it's a really good example. The gang culture there sort of controls the department in many ways. So police are organized into lots of different formations, some of which are public, like police unions and police foundations, but others are not public, and others are really secretive kind of cultures. And so I think this underworld that goes on beneath all the public policy fighting that you see is actually much more important than most people understand.
So in the book, you note that local governments spend a lot of money building, quote, an ecosystem of conventional wisdom that legitimizes the public punishment bureaucracy. We see this here in Milwaukee through, quote unquote, nonpartisan policies, research organizations who both the city and the county regularly contract with. What might you recommend people like us who work in similar smaller nonprofits or who do community work, what do we do to help challenge the narrative being driven by these researchers and these feds and city officials?
One of my favorite chapters in the book is about these researchers. And I use two Harvard professors as an example of this because they're such clowns and the story is so funny. But it's a pervasive problem everywhere. And then I have another chapter where I talk about how does bad academic research or bad think tank research become conventional wisdom? It's really important to understand these mechanisms. There's a lot of ways you can fight back against it. To me, broadly speaking, the most important thing is what I would call, broadly speaking, accountability. The people involved in those systems, they have to be made to understand that they can do this, but they have to accept the consequences of what they're doing, meaning they are no longer welcome at polite liberal dinner party society. What they are doing is what the far right is doing. So if you want to do this, just market yourself as a far right person. Like what you are doing is completely contrary to the available empirical evidence, calculated to distort and deceive in service of an incredibly horrific and grotesque and brutal punishment bureaucracy in ways that are destroying the fabric of our society at a time of rising authoritarianism. You have to own it if you're going to do it. What you can't do is pretend to be caring about all these values and at the same time undermining it, validating the mythologies and the lies and the attitudes and the intuitions that the authoritarians are capitalizing on. Not only just validating them, but subtly celebrating them and normalizing them and desensitizing the rest of us to the horrific nature of what they're talking about. So this class of people needs to be called out, and they need to be called out in strategic and effective ways. And that's, to me, kind of like what I'm trying to do in the book. If I had to pick like one thing I'm trying to get people to understand, is the importance of, within our own supposed anti-fascist coalition, we need to make clear that we're going to hold you accountable if you do things that help the fascists. And that, to me, is what a lot of these kind of mainstream news organizations and a lot of these think tanks that they rely on constantly are actually doing. So this book tries to give people the tools to pick apart what all these think tanks and researchers are doing, because it's actually a pretty small cabal of these people. And they're very well funded in most places because the research that they do supports the interests of real estate developers and some of the wealthiest people in our society. In many cases, they're funded by police foundations and other entities. But like actually being able to pick apart what they're doing and why, and showing how it's similar to what these other groups do in these other cities, and drawing some of these connections for people, I think is really valuable as a first step. And then, so I think we have to call them out publicly, we have to call them out rigorously, we have to stop inviting them into our and stop treating them like they're some normal part of our coalition. We need to make clear, like, if you're going to be in our coalition, here are the 5 principles you have to abide by. And one of those principles is you can't support the expansion of the punishment bureaucracy. If what you do supports the expansion of the punishment bureaucracy at a time of unprecedented state repression, you're out of our coalition. You're not invited to our dinner party. Okay? We're not gonna be treating you like a person that we laugh and smile with when some of the most horrific imaginable things are happening in our society.
So here in Milwaukee, especially in this building and especially in this organization, the Turners, there's a lot of work that's being done to kind of counter the punishment bureaucracy, right? Lots of programs that are getting to root causes and really trying to change the narrative. How do you suggest that we help broaden our public's imagination of what it means to have alternatives to the punishment bureaucracy?
That's a great question. It's very hard because the public's imagination and sense of what's possible is so limited because every single day they're getting articles and news stories and posts that associate harm and violence with punishment. So it's even in the stock photos. There's like some crime somewhere and the stock photo is like a police siren or something like that, right? Instead of like a chart of like housing costs or, you know, investment in early childhood education, which would be much more, from an empirical evidence standpoint, much more related to the event that they're talking about. So all of our even basic associations are being distorted. It's very, very, very difficult. I think a place to start, and there's a lot to say, and I have more to say in the book. A place to start is getting organized groups of people, whether it's labor, like nurses unions or teachers unions or home healthcare workers or trade groups, to understand that actually these local investments are like a zero-sum game. So all the money that you're spending on this new police surveillance contract and jailing someone and whatever, that's money that instead of arresting and jailing this person, it could be used to pay them to learn a trade. Or it's money that could be paid for a sort of first response mental health unit instead of a police unit, right? These are all things that are much more associated with good outcomes, much cheaper than police. And so getting buy-in from these other segments of the population that have their own bases, that have their own clout and credibility, and getting them to see that actually we're in a battle here. And I also think that it's I think some respects it's like in the climate field when they talk about like building a just future. People are thinking a lot about like, okay, as a political matter, what do we do with coal miners? Like we need to offer a viable path to supporting families and communities who are invested in this thing that the evidence shows is harmful to all these other, to their own communities, to their own health and well-being. And it turns out when you ask people would love to have a different job that didn't give them cancer and that didn't pollute the groundwater in their community. And unfortunately, many of these communities, the only jobs they're being offered are either like mines or prisons. Yeah. Oh, do you want us to come and build a prison in your community, right? Yeah. The same is true at like the local policing level. You could offer people in the local police department a similarly well-paying job if they left the police and did something else that had a different thing in the community. And people are actually thinking through that because as a political matter, or you can remove the Seattle police. Actually, this is very interesting. Seattle police did an internal like confidential survey, and the results were really shocking. Like the police themselves were like, we don't need to be doing almost any like. They recommended themselves, like confidentially and anonymously, that they get rid of like 12 of their own internal departments.
Wow.
And they were like, yeah, we got to get rid of traffic. We got to get rid of all the homeless outreach. We got to get rid of all like. So they were like, we're not good at this, and we don't want to do it. And like, if you paid people to not carry a gun and to have a totally different approach to work, obviously there'd be retraining and there'd be, but like you could actually, and in doing that, you would reduce the size and power of the policing. Labor industry, you could shift a lot of these jobs into jobs that actually those people themselves. Yeah. So it turns out that prison guards, by and large, have very low job satisfaction rankings, and they would actually much prefer a different kind of job. And so these are difficult conversations to have, even on the left. Some of the stuff I'm saying is actually not popular on the left, right? But they're the kinds of political conversations that you have to start having in these communities because these interests that you're going up against are very, very, very powerful. And many of them are like the only path to like a middle-class pension and income for certain segments of the community. And so it's like actually important as a political strategic matter to think about like how are you going to move and shift all of these resources away from carceral bureaucracies that destroy and isolate and traumatize and brutalize people into things that don't do that.
Yeah. So I want to get to one last question, and then I want to see what we've got in the room here. But, we're sitting here at this very historic intersection in the city of Milwaukee where this corridor has been, I'll use the term whitewashed into this safe on-ramp for people to come into the dangerous city. And there's these pervasive narratives that demonize young black people, especially black boys in our city. It's reflected in the media. It's reflected by our elected officials. It's even in conversations within the broader community around the water cooler. We see that this is the way that quote-unquote crimes like reckless driving and street takeovers and issues of violence downtown create a disproportionate attention in the media. How can we reframe these conversations, have more honest conversations about who is responsible for these complex issues, and how do we get closer to better solutions?
I want to answer your question by taking a little detour first.
Please.
I think there's a concept from the book. I go into all this stuff in a much deeper and I hope funny way in the book because I think it's important to like actually try to laugh when we do this stuff because this is really dark stuff. But there's an important concept in terms of like how do we reframe these conversations. I think it's important to understand how are these conversations being distorted? What are the most effective mechanisms to be distorted? Because then we can sort of think about how to undistort them.
Undistort, okay.
So one really important concept from the book is what I call the volume of news, and a related concept is the selective curation of anecdote. Okay, so what do I mean by this?
Yeah.
Well, let's say I'm in Milwaukee, right? So you guys have a basketball. You guys have you have
the Bucks are literally across the
right.
street.
So I have to be.
We can throw a basketball to the Pfizer Forum from the front door.
So let's go with there's a basketball player named Giannis Antetokounmpo, okay, who a fellow Greek, all right.
Equally difficult last name to say.
Yeah. And so I have to be careful at my events because many people who come to see me don't like sports balls. And so I'll say something like, I'll be in a city and I'll say like a basketball player from the city, and people are like, why are you saying that to us?
Crickets.
And I also made the mistake when I was in Canada. I tried to do like a hockey thing. And I thought I was in safe territory to criticize Wayne Gretzky because he's become such a hard right Trumpian. And I made a casual but true comment that Mario Lemieux is the greatest hockey player of all time. I'm from Pittsburgh, and it was like a riot in there. But anyway, I think I'll use Giannis as an example.
Yes.
So let's say like there's some kid. We don't have a basketball team in Pittsburgh. So let's say you want me to explain to some kid in Pittsburgh who Giannis is.
Right.
And you say, okay, I'm going to make a video of Giannis's career. I'm going to show this kid what Giannis is like. But for the video, I just make a montage of every time Giannis fell down and lost the ball and missed a dunk and missed a shot, okay? It could be like a 9-hour video, and it's just Giannis looking terrible, like the most, like just so unathletic, okay? I show it to this kid. And this kid's like, how did this guy even make the NBA, right? Like, this is the worst athlete I've ever seen. I could even do the same thing with Michael Jordan. I could have every one of Michael Jordan's missed shots in an 8-hour video and show it to this kid. What I've done is using true facts. Yes. Every single one of these situations was a time when Giannis fell over or missed a rebound or missed a dunk or whatever. Has he ever missed a dunk? I don't even know. But like every one of these times would be true fact.
Yeah.
And what I would have done is I've created a false impression that this person is not a good basketball player using entirely true facts. This is what the news media does with crime. This is what the news media does with shoplifting. At a time when shoplifting is down, they can create the impression that shoplifting is up. Yes. At a time when homicide is down, like you could have a city with a certain number of homicides one year, and then the homicides go down the next year, but they do 3 times as many stories about homicide, and people think homicide went up.
Yeah.
Okay? So this is the selective creation of anecdote used to take true facts to create false impressions. This is what the news media is doing all the time with crime. It's related to something called the volume of news. One of the ways you do this is by ratcheting up or down the number of stories on particular issues. Okay, so if you guys remember, there was an incident of shoplifting in San Francisco at a Walgreens that went viral a few years ago. It was actually very impressive. The person had like a bicycle and like bags on each side, and they were like bicycling while scooping things into their bags, like one of those old game shows where you like won by the
minute to win it.
Like yeah, exactly. The amount of money you got into your cart at the end, and then somehow balanced out of the store. I mean, it was incredible. That single video, tens of millions of views, spawned 309 local news stories around the country within 28 days.
Sure.
During that same window, there was not a single news story around the country about Walgreens' wage theft allegations. Far larger amount of harm. The volume of news totally determines what we feel urgently about, what we feel is scary, right? And so by selectively picking which stories you tell in high or low volumes, you can distort. So this is a really important thing to understand for local news. It can be very, very important just to reduce the number of local news stories about certain kinds of harm and to increase the number of local news stories about other kinds of harms. And you can work on this by building relationships with local reporters, by building your own local independent news, by doing some of the source organizing I was talking about before, and just by making more people aware of this kind of propaganda. So I think I have some other ideas in the book, but like I think the most important thing is probably intervening in the volume of news and doing political education around like how anecdotes are actually weaponized and to distort how we perceive safety.
Excellent. So I want to socialize this and make sure everyone else in the room has a chance. Do we have any questions that we've gotten so far? Yep, raising hands. All right, let's start with this gentleman right here in the front. Go ahead, sir.
Hey, so I do a lot of police abolition organizing in the city. I also do a lot of organizing around Palestine. And this year, I mentioned organizing around a lead crisis out of the trying our schools here. And so what strikes me in reading your book is sort of the direct connection between propaganda here in the United States and building consent for genocide in Palestine, and how that keeps feeding itself, right? A lot of these FRT components, surveillance from are originated. Perfecting that technology there that's coming back home. Do you have anything to say about less connections and sort of exactly that, how they feed each other, or how we can maybe try to get you out of that cycle?
The question for the people on, do I need to repeat it?
Thank
for the
you.
people
That'd be great. Yeah.
Online? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
the
you.
question was essentially about the relationship between the kinds of propaganda that I'm talking about and the way in which the news media in our society is and has been building consent for the genocide in Palestine. So I think I literally did a whole event in Canada on this. It was an event about propaganda and the genocide and how they fit together. And so I have like several hours worth of things to say about it. But I'll
have
try-
one.
Yeah. I'll be really brief. I think every single thing I talk about in the book is equally applicable across any domain of propaganda. So everything I talk about in the book is equally applicable to the way that the idea of immigration is constructed in the modern news ecosystem. The concept of a border, the idea of a militarized border, the concept of a wave of illegal immigrants, the supposed dangers that come from that, the harms that flow from it, what to do about it, what are the solutions, the dehumanization, the erasure, the experts, whose voices are heard, whose voices are ignored. So same is true with healthcare, right? The way our healthcare system is covered. The same is actually true with how our education system is covered. The way that private and charter schools are covered, the way that public school teachers are talked about. You can really apply all these lessons, and especially, some of the questions I get people to ask, like, why is this a news story now? Whose voices are included? Whose voices are ignored? What context is provided? What context is ignored? What words are used? So the same kind of stuff is happening. Now, there's an even deeper connection, I think, to the genocide, because the coverage of these two issues merges a lot in our culture, whether it's the coverage of the policing of people who are standing up against the genocide, whether it's the framing of the harms, so like the distraction. So I talk a lot about how the news media distracts us from the actual material underlying conditions. Is very similar to how the news media talks about campus anti-Semitism as a way of distracting people from talking about the underlying genocide. So like the use of true anecdotes to tell false stories, quoting of experts and sources without disclosing their interests and their background, right? And their conflicts of interest. Like everything I talk about in the book is essentially applicable here. And then there's this other element where a lot of U.S. police departments are training in Israel, where a lot of the traditional development, Anthony Lowenstein has actually written a book about this, but like a lot of the technology and tactics that the Israeli military is using and experimenting with eventually filter out across the world, not just the United States. Also, you have to understand, and I wrote some of this book and did some research while I was in India. And I was really interested in studying the rise of authoritarianism and the far-right Hindu nationalist party in India. And a lot of the same consulting firms that built, for example, the national digital ID system in India, which is now being weaponized unlike anything that our world has really ever seen in terms of like the ability of the state, which now has like 1 billion people in a biometric database, along with laws that are designed to basically enable them to cancel the ability of Muslims to live. Which is something we can get into more. But the consulting firms that built that are the very same consulting firms offering to do criminal justice reform in Los Angeles County. Okay, the same companies that are operating in Israel and India and in United Arab Emirates, across the world, they're operating here, Australia. And the same investors and private equity firms, like these things are all really, really connected, way more connected than is typically reported in the mainstream news media. And we have to understand that. And we have to think about like, well, what is a strategy for? Well, I'll also just say one difference is depending on the country, there is either a greater or a lesser need to frame some of these authoritarian measures as reforms. Some countries are able to be a little bit more on. There's more of an overt kind of It's kind of like, have you guys heard that Trump wants to rename the Department of Defense the Department of War?
Yeah.
Okay. So we actually used to have the Department of War. And then the United States changed it to the Department of Defense because the culture was evolving so that it was a little bit awkward and a little bit inconsistent with sort of the sort of veneer of liberal values that we had to frame our imperial violence as defensive now, right?
Yeah.
We could no longer say it was offensive. Now,
Right.
there's something interesting is happening now because Trump is basically saying I am calling an end to that liberal, neoliberal era. I'm saying we're now going to be more honest again about what we're doing, or just sheer exercise of brutal power. That's a really interesting thing that he's doing, right? He's saying we don't need that propaganda anymore. We have so much control. The authoritarian right has so much power and control. We can be more honest again about what we're doing. Okay, not that honesty is a word I would use to describe anything, but in this sense. Okay, now in a lot of these other more authoritarian societies, they frame police surveillance cameras as a method of control and wealth preservation and crushing dissent. Right? Whereas in, liberal mayor in Minneapolis is framing it as like a police reform, So it's really interesting to actually study these issues and to think about how they all fit together. And then I would say some of what I talk about in the book is weaponized to a degree with the genocide that is even well beyond what I talk about in the book, because in my book, I'm talking about propaganda that is weaponized to support a system of mass human caging that is unprecedented in modern recorded world history. The United States cages black people at 6 times the rate of South Africa at the height of apartheid. You need propaganda to get people to go along with something like that. But a genocide is like a whole other level. And so some of the stuff that I talk about in my book, the tactics are kind of like on steroids in trying to shape people's perceptions of what Israel is doing.
Questions? Anyone else? Yes, in the back.
So you had an implicit question about why a math teacher would want your book. So my dad is a retired statistician and became a substitute teacher. And in order to get any applicants to care about math, he would use statistics that they care about in their community, like this, to be able to say, this is why, this is how it's being paid, but this is the other way to do it. My guess is, I don't know, but my guess is your book has places where you'll be able to find that. So the rogue statistician teachers, that's a predict. But my question for you is, when we go on to Thanksgiving this year and we have family members who really don't want to talk about this or actively anti everything, how do we we're in the view saying approach conversations using all your experience?
So the question for those of you who are streaming is, when you're talking with loved ones, close family, coworkers, how do you start framing these conversations to have some openness and some honesty and some education?
That's a really hard question, and
it's a $1 million question too.
It's kind of funny because I'm not sure anybody would consider me an expert in the art of persuading family members of anything, really. Certainly not my family. I'm just kidding, actually. I've been pretty successful with my family. It was actually, we went through a really difficult time with my family. My parents a few years ago were both diagnosed with a really degenerative case of New York Times brainworms. And it was really difficult for everyone in the family, and I had to come and do administer the cure. And
is there a prescription for this cure? How does this work?
There's no prescription. Okay. I had to invent it.
All right.
And so it was a long process. But I think the key to curing anyone of MSNBC or New York Times brainworms or related diseases is kind of meeting them where they are without judgment, I think. And I think, let me just say, the rhetorical tactics and strategies that I use at events like this are different from how I would talk one-on-one with someone or in a safe environment at home, because you have to, those are sensitive and deep relationships, and they're both easier and harder. there's this concept, there's this sense in which I think a lot of people on the left tend to, I think, fail because they don't appreciate that there's a psychological and emotional barrier to someone if they think that you think you're better than them.
Yep.
And I think one reason that a lot of liberals hate the left more than they hate the right is that the existence of someone over here who's basically saying to them, you say you care about these values, but I'm living your values better than you are.
Yep.
Because if you cared about equality, you would do this. Or if you cared about all these, these things that you say you care about, racial justice or whatever it is, then you wouldn't be doing that. You would be doing what I'm doing, right? It's actually a really big barrier in any conversation when you're talking to a liberal person. They're very defensive about this. And different people have different ways through that. But I think you have to start by disarming people, by letting them know that you have a shared relationship, that you care about them, that you actually went through a similar process, and you have to be self-deprecating and humble about it, and you have to really walk through your own journey. And what was it that made you go from being like them to where you are now? And how would it be better or different for their lives if they did? And so there's not a one-size-fits-all answer. And different people have different access points. Some people who have experienced physical or sexual trauma have different access points than people who maybe have experienced addiction. There are a lot of people I have worked with a lot of very conservative rural communities in my career. Many of my cases have been in those communities. It's really important to talk about how these systems are actually connected to the problems they're seeing in their daily lives. And there are shared points of a lot of people who identify as, let's say, right wing or Republican, they actually have a deep hatred of the liberal elite. And so you kind of share that with them. We have a shared hatred of the liberal elite. And you can make people, and they also have a shared skepticism of what people in power are saying often, right? And so there are footholds you can grasp onto, and then you can actually show them that yes, they hate those people, but actually some of the reasons they've been given are actually maybe incorrect, or or yes, it's correct to be critical of them, but the solution is actually this other thing. And I think I don't purport to have a clear way of doing it, but I definitely support you getting a bulk shipment of Copaganda for your family for Thanksgiving.
Yes, right here.
I'm kind of summarizing some of the stuff that you said, so hey, it's wrong or correct me. I think that you're kind of citing that the concentration of media is part and problem. It's in the hands of a few who get to kind of shake the narrative. And social media was supposed to solve it, but we're seeing now with X, Meta, and TikTok, and the politicized pause. Oh my gosh. Both sides are having issues in media. I feel like the lane of views that were able to trust is shrinking, and already, I was in high school 8 years ago, and they're already saying these are the few things that you can trust, and that's shrinking to even smaller now of what to cite. And at the same time, all of our time that we had to intake information is also shrinking because we're surviving on small budgets, making less money in comparison to what things cost. I guess the question is, do you have anything you'd recommend in terms of trying to stay connected without getting sucked into frame media? Anything this big?
It is a big question. So I want to make sure we're hearing it right. You're looking for alternative and or trustworthy ways in which we can consume stories, journalism, and media at a time where the trust has gotten to an all-time low, if in fact it's sometimes zero. Okay. I agree with everything you said. Guy who works in media.
You said it. I didn't say it. I mean, I actually have said that too, but
that's why I'm here.
Chapter 16 is going to be great for you, I think. I have a few suggestions. I think, first of all, if you develop more critical capacities to consume the news, you will you can trust yourself more to consume kind of more mainstream news. It's very dangerous. I don't recommend it. In fact, one of my first recommendations in the book is like never consume like the New York Times. Like don't consume daily news. Instead of the time that you would spend reading the first 200 words of like 20 articles and the headlines, take that time and read one longer article or a section of a book or something on something that you're passionate about, something that you're interested in. And what the evidence shows is that you're actually going to retain the facts better. So over a month or 2 months of doing that, instead of reading thousands of headlines and a little snippet of an article or a little post that you're scrolling on, you will have like actually read a bunch of long form pieces or listened to a podcast or a documentary or read a few books, and you're actually going to remember that stuff. It's going to actually stick with you, and you're going to remember the facts that you've heard. You could even read long form pieces that cover the exact same topics as all those news stories, and you're going to have retained it more because you're getting the story and the facts on a longer causal arc that like makes you understand the whole story better. So I think one quick tip is like consume fewer deeper things as your daily practice. Also, look at the kinds of things that people you really respect and trust are consuming. If there's people in your life whose views you really trust, I try to start people off with a little bit of a bibliography in the book, but like, and I think like for media criticism, the Citations Needed podcast is incredible. The Dig is another great podcast if you guys like podcasts. Citations Needed.
And the Dig.
And the Dig.
Yeah.
But there's so many things, and depending on your area of interest, if you're interested in climate stuff, in immigration stuff, in Palestine-related content, I mean, there's incredible people doing, and so you curate for yourself over time. You find the people who you really trust, and you look at what those people are reading, and so you kind of build this for yourself too. And then I would say there actually are a lot of independent news outlets that are pretty trustworthy, and supporting them instead of supporting like some of the ones that are like more corporate is really important in this moment. So I think like those are some basic tips, but I give more in the last chapter.
Yes.
I am interested in Milwaukee and Bucks. I found out this week about Tanashiko, the message concept I actually kind of our media. Yeah. But what I wanted to ask is, under the assumption that you watched this series, because I just want to know your thoughts on it, the series The Wire. Essentially, we talk about Copaganda and The Wire. What do you see? If you've seen The Wire.
Yeah. For those streaming, we're trying to talk about where fact and fiction collide here. We're referring to The Wire, absolute must-watch TV, but also, where is this fantasy and where is this reality, and how does this relate to Copaganda?
I have seen The Wire, but it's been, almost 20 years maybe. I'm very old. It's really depressing that that's true. So I think my criticism, my top line recollection is that the show was incredibly entertaining, but had terrible politics. Copaganda on steroids.
Yeah.
Not as bad as there's a Spike Lee movie called Black Klansman, which is the most grotesque Copaganda I've ever seen captured on film. Interesting fact, Spike Lee was under contract for marketing with the NYPD when he made that movie.
Wait, can you say that again?
Spike Lee had a marketing PR contract with the NYPD at the time he made Black Klansman.
Wow.
But The Wire is incredibly compelling, entertaining. That's part of what makes it so dangerous, because one of the main problems with all that kind of media is it gets you into these characters, and you start to really feel something for even the police characters, which really distracts you from the function of what the policing bureaucracy does in an unequal society.
Yes.
And so the whole series has you thinking about kind of the wrong things. And I mean, obviously there's David Simon as meant to be like in his prior show, Homicide: Life on the Streets, like he means to be also doing some liberal critique of the police, right? And obviously he portrays some corrupt stuff, and but like by and large, he's portraying the police as an institution very differently from the bulk of what the police do.
Right.
And getting you to form emotional attachments with police officers in ways that is just counterproductive to, it's good for good narrative stories, but it's counterproductive for actually developing a critique of that institution. What role does the punishment bureaucracy play in an extraordinarily unequal society? Well, it disciplines and crushes the poorest people in that society and anyone who seeks to change the balance of power in that society. So I think that's my top line kind of recollection, but I would have to like watch individual episodes again to like point out particular things that I thought were. I actually once taught a lecture at Harvard Law School about The Wire, but even that was like 15 years ago, and so I don't even really remember the examples that I used.
So I know you have a very good.
I was asking because it is for some kind of critique, but that is why I'm working on the critique that we in this.
Yes.
Right.
Sir.
I wanted to rant about The Wire.
Yes.
Because I think it's actually one of the most subtle versions of Copaganda out there. It is actually able to reach people who are aware of a lot of other miles of propaganda.
Yes.
And so and a couple of these stuff. Ed Chang was a police recorder at the Baltimore Sun. And one of his primary sources was a guy named Ed Burns, who was a homicide detective. And Ed Burns was his lens into the Baltimore police department, and he later, after Burns retired, they did some writing projects together. So the book that Homicide is based on was co-written by Sina and Burns, who was an ex-cop.
Yes.
And I think what is interesting about The Wire is that I think he does embed some real critiques. Well, he embeds real critiques of the whole society.
Yes.
And the police. But the way that he recuperates the costs is through McNulty. Because McNulty is the primary protagonist of the series. He is a cop. He's a cop who sees the problem of what the cop bosses are doing, but he's the solution to it. So the solution to the problem with the cops is a better cop.
Right.
And that's the politics of The Wire in a nutshell. But I so fucking love this.
So I'll recap that for those who are streaming, where expletive loves the show. But Alec, I actually am developing a question based off of this because there's a lot of passion in our country around fiction, right? Fiction drives people. People identify themselves. I'm a Star Wars guy. I'm a Lord of the Rings guy. You know what I'm saying? This is me. These are important things, I think, that are, and a lot of times in culture, more important than reading the news, more important than reading a book, more important than learning facts. So how do we actually reconcile the fact that fiction and drama and art has a lot more of the attention of the people than a lot of the realities that you're talking about in your book?
Yeah, I mean, more people have seen The Wire than read my book, so we're in trouble,
Not after tonight.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, the truth is that most people's... I want to say one more thing about that, actually, which is that when people, in my opinion, when people consume the news, they're kind of primed, in a subtle way maybe, they're primed to think that they're being manipulated in some way by someone. They're hearing the news, which is really different from when they read their like church newsletter, or if you get Cigar Magazine, or Tennis Quarterly or something. Like, some of the most subtle messages can be inputted in those other environments where people are not primed to be thinking they're hearing about controversial things. So, for example, like a profile of an abolitionist cigar lover in Cigar Quarterly could do more for abolition than any news story, because people will see this person who has these kind of like radical left views, but they'll relate to them as a fellow cigar lover, and they'll be able to like say some of the same things they might say in a news story in a way that will be read and felt and heard differently.
Yeah.
So like, the best thing that we can do is like infiltrate some of the, like the Knitting magazine and like the, like I should be in the Greek Orthodox Church newsletter or something, right? Like, so I was an altar boy for many years. So I put in my service. They should promote Copaganda. I feel like. I was actually the head altar boy for years.
How many of your talks have you busted that fact
I don't think I've ever said that.
Okay, we got a special one, Milwaukee. That was my assumption. We got a unique exclusive tonight.
Yeah. So I was actually the one that prepared all the communion.
Love it.
So if you took communion at Annunciation Greek Orthodox Church in a small steel town outside Pittsburgh in the 1990s, I probably made it for you. But like these are and I think fictional like the arts are more like that than they are the news.
Yeah.
When your guard is down when you're consuming these things. This is when you accumulate a lot of your attitudes and assumptions and intuitions, and it's for that reason quite dangerous because many of the people that can afford to make slickly produced art of the kind that is popular in our society, like either don't share the views that I have about the world. Or if they do, they understand that the people who are paying for it and who own the sort of mechanisms of production and dissemination would not hire them if they expressed their actual views. So it's a really, really, really difficult problem. And also, it's absolutely essential in this moment that people on the left start engaging more in the culture battle. We're losing the culture battle. We're not fun. We're annoying. There's not a lot of great leftist comedy anymore that's in sort of like widely available. There are some exceptions, of course, but there's not that much TV or theater is kind of an exception, and puppetry is a really, really important exception. There's a lot of great lefty puppetry. It's very easy to communicate certain ideas through puppets. That you couldn't otherwise maybe say or get people to really think about. But like these are kind of more fringe things. Yeah. And in terms of mass media production, it's a big, big, big problem. Yes. And I wonder if, I think it's gonna be more and more and more important that we devote serious time and resources to producing that kind of, so for example, like the film Don't Look Up or the TV show Andor. Those are examples of an attempt by the people who made them clearly to push some kind of leftist messaging, but there's not as much of that stuff, and it's a big problem. And I've been thinking about that, but honestly, it's like very, very difficult. There's a very high financial barrier to entry to produce work like that. So we have to think about like, what do we do in our own communities, whether it's musical theater or improv comedy or other kinds of art. So we have an artist and a poet in residence at our organization, and all of our artists and poets in residence are people who've been incarcerated, and like their whole job with our organization is to think with our lawyers about how do we communicate in different ways. Yes. How do we sometimes will do art exhibits. We've done some really cool art exhibits at like the Museum of Modern Art in New York and other places. And we're just trying to reach people in like different ways, but it's very, very, it's a big problem that we can't address fully tonight.
No doubt. So, I mean, my specialty in this world is music, right? This is what we do at Radio Milwaukee. And, I would argue that there's a lot of very progressive thinking happening in artists' world right now. And a lot of them are leaving the mainstream platforms. Our very own Nick Sandborn from here in Milwaukee is half of Sylvanesso. They just pulled all their music from Spotify because they don't want to continue to support warmongers and they want to be conscious about where their music is. They also know they're losing millions of dollars in doing that. And it's a choice that they're making reluctantly. And it actually comes into this really great question we just got from Zoom, which is that the country is being manipulated by the media, predominantly being controlled by billionaires. The billionaire class drives the agenda with benefits where the police state apparatus helps them. So how do we fight this on a local level? I love that question.
Great. An easy one. How do we fight the billionaires?
Well, I mean, again, but on the local level, I want to emphasize that word because we all in this room have control of our community, our circle of influence that we have. There's a lot of great leaders in this room. Let's just focus on this area right here, southeastern Wisconsin.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the defining characteristics of our time is the extraordinary levels of atomization and isolation. And that begins at the local level. For example, in most major US cities, it's very, very, very hard for young people to find a place to hang out with each other.
Yeah.
People, unless you want to pay $7 for a coffee, you can't sit places.
You can't.
There's no spaces for people to go play games, to go hang out, to go do music together. One really important thing would be in a town like this to just invest in spaces where people can congregate, physical spaces. Open up those spaces, have music parties there, have dance classes, do yoga together. So
you're saying this building is
this
what you're
building
describing.
right here.
Because everything you just described happens in this building.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've heard in just my little time here. That needs to be in neighborhoods across the city, and it needs to be in every city. Most cities don't have anything like this place, right? I mean, it's very special. And this place could be a central driving force. I don't actually know your city at all, really, but maybe it could be a driving force in helping to create spaces for people in a bunch of neighborhoods, because it might be hard to get down here for some people. I don't know. So like one idea is just start with physical space. And then I think it's really cool. Like so many people have, I did this thing for years, which was like a free mutual aid class program for adults where anybody who wanted to could teach a class to anyone else. And so you would just, whatever expertise you had, you would put it on this little forum, and then thousands and thousands of people every week would go to these classes. So I could teach one on my rock collection, or on the punishment bureaucracy, which is my 2 areas of expertise. And someone else would teach one on the Great British Baking Show, and someone else would do one on a historic tour of DC, and someone else would do one on private equity, and someone would do one on the French Revolution. And these are ways that we bring each other together. And then there's just so many, I talked a little bit earlier about Court Watch. So setting up Court Watch programs that bring people together to actually it's a great thing for people like my mom when she retired. Yeah. It's a great thing for people to get involved with who have 5, 6, 7 hours a week. Yeah. So basically anything that brings you together with other people and gets you thinking about the problems in your own community, not mediated through mass media at all, would be a good thing.
Awesome. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. I have one over here in the back. Go ahead. Yep, that's you. Yep. I'm talking to you. Stand up, sister. What you got?
I really appreciate what was said about sort of the power prosecutors are doubling as a result of the proliferation of bunny cakes. I'm wondering, can you advise for pets turkeys who are trying to contend with this axolotl or bunny cake situation?
So we're looking for advice for defense attorneys as it relates to the body cam normalization and practice.
Yeah, it's a great question. I do a lot of training for public defenders. This is a tough one. I mean, the body cameras are pretty much a overall net negative. One thing is that one thing that's so bad is that prosecutors flood defense attorneys with so much body camera footage, it would be literally impossible to review it. So if 9 officers report to an arrest and there's 9 hours of body camera footage, how do you even, you can't, it would be impossible for a public defender or defense attorney with hundreds of cases to even begin to look at the body camera footage. But the prosecutors can say, oh, we turned over the video of, everything that happened, and sometimes it's on the 8th video you look at, 42 minutes in, that you see the cop planting the drugs, or that you see the one cop, saying to the other cop, oh yeah, we actually didn't see him, make that turn without signaling, or so whatever it is. I do that all the time in my cases, and most of that stuff is being missed, and so it's a big problem. I think one thing I would say is, if I were still at a public defender office, I would appoint a special point person at the office who's a coordinator for this kind of stuff, whose job is to kind of scan, and it doesn't even have to be a lawyer, to scan these videos for newsworthy things, whether it's commentary or an incident or a deletion, or you have a point person who's kind of in charge of this, and then thinking also about how do we use this footage, since it exists, as in our own kind of PR efforts to try to get people to actually understand what the police are doing. Because as good as body cameras are overall for the police, they also do catch a fair amount of corruption. Now, We know from the overall empirical evidence that body cameras, and we've studied, this has been studied, even the federal government admits this, they do not make the police any less violent. So their number one thing that they're supposed to do, they don't do it. Okay, so it's a total lie. I mean, like that's like not a controversial thing. I talk about that a lot in the essay on body cameras. But notwithstanding that, they have enabled a fair number of people to get compensation for certain kinds of misconduct, and also if we had a synthesized and kind of system for reviewing and then communicating about them, public defenders might be able to tell certain stories in court and outside court in ways that were a little bit more strategic. But I'm really scraping the bottom of the barrel. They're pretty much an overall like disaster for the defense bar.
Yes, in the front.
Yeah, I just have a quick follow-up. Is AI a potential solution to that review problem?
Is AI a solution to the review problem with 9 to 90 hours of video?
Yeah, so people are using AI to create transcripts of these things, and you might be able to, I don't actually know whether there is tools being marketed to public defender offices. The way these things work is that like someone is creating an AI tool to sell to public defender offices to do this, and criminal defense lawyers. Someone's also creating AI. I've seen AI being marketed in terms of the last question to like dramatically reduce the production costs of cultural output, so that the idea is like you maybe don't have to be a Hollywood studio anymore to create slickly produced kind of like cultural end products. So maybe there. I mean, I think it's possible. Certainly people should be thinking. I'm very much a Luddite, so I've never used like any of those things. But people should be thinking about that. Yeah. And if they're, I mean, certainly it's being weaponized against us in a wide variety of ways. And like, it's really important that people understand how they work and how they might be able to be used in ways that either slow or prevent the harmful things they're being used for.
In the back? Yep, that's you. Sorry, I'm doing a bad job of making eye contact with the audience.
So you talk about punishment bureaucracy in terms of its intentions and outputs, which super easy. But if we're looking to do targeted action, a lot of these different institutions have different orientations towards their own longevity. Their core is going to replicate itself in a different manner that a business is, right? They're running the alignment, but, presumably they're using different mechanisms. So I assume there are friction points. So I wanted to ask you as the expert, where are those friction points, and what can we do to direct action to target them?
So we're looking for friction points in these disparate systems that are supporting Copaganda, and how do we actually, find the shaft where we shoot the missile to destroy the Death Star?
I love it. In a non-violent way, of course. That was a figure of speech.
Size of a womp rat.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite questions I've gotten on my whole book tour. That was a great question. And really well put. So I think that basically all of my work as an attorney is an attempt to answer that question. I am trying to make strategic decisions about which cases to choose, and which cases to not take that might feel really righteous, but like I can't figure out a way to turn them into a point of tension between different powerful systems. So this is why I'm doing the right to hug case. I think there are real tensions between what the telecom industry wants and what sheriffs actually ultimately want. And we can create more tension by changing the laws that sheriffs are required to follow, for example. That's just one example. There are also real tensions between the stories and narratives that these different people tell. So what the telecom companies have to tell their shareholders and bond investors is maybe really different from the story that a sheriff has to tell a judge in court, or a prosecutor has to say to a judge when explaining why someone should be jailed pre-trial. And so we're constantly trying to exploit that. With the money bail system, the story that these people have to tell in court sometimes is really different from the story they have to tell the public. So there's no like one size fits all answer to your question. Good strategy is all about mapping out, let's just take a legal system, mapping out like which actors have which incentives and where is their base of support, either financial or political or whatever, and which other actors are they involved with, and where do those interests like line up or not line up, and then how do we attack some of the foundations for those things. I can try to think of a couple other examples off the top of my head, but like, my general answer is you've just described like how I approach a lot of the time strategy. Now, sometimes we do cases and do work not really caring about finding a weakness in a particular adversary, but like much more general work that's about like culture or like sort of changing the whole ecosystem that we're all swimming in. So if we want to do a series of cases that sort of resensitize our culture to the idea of family separation or something like that, that might be like so it's not every case, but what's another example of, that's a really hard, I'd have to think more to think of like a particular example of like a weak point that we are exploiting in our work. I think like another thing I'll say is that in general, this is less and less true as the far right accumulates more and more power, but there are a lot of contradictions between the values that are written on our constitutional monuments and our constitutional scrolls, like between the way the law is written and talked about and the way the law is lived and executed on the bodies and minds of the poorest people in our society. That gap is tremendously productive for us because a lot of the people that work within the punishment bureaucracy and even the people that work in these companies, they're not just doing it for ambition and power all the time and wealth. They are human beings like anyone else. These institutions are filled with human beings now. They have their own cultures, et cetera. But part of that is that they have their own ideologies and they tell themselves certain stories about what they do. And if you can undermine those stories by showing how they're in tension with what they're actually doing, you can actually start getting a lot of defectors and internal saboteurs, whistleblowers, right? Like, I've had so many police officers and prosecutors and sheriffs call me and be like, hey, I saw you on this thing, or like, we saw you filed this case. Like, by the way, you didn't hear it from me, but like, you should look on page 4 of this document, or, you should, So like, by exposing these contradictions and tensions, you can actually, send signals out to people within these bureaucracies that like, there might be an opportunity for us to work together on undermining their effectives or something like that. So in general, I think it's a very effective strategy to point out how liberals for example, are constantly failing to live up to their own values. And relentlessly pointing that out is, I think, undermining their own internal coalitions, because their coalitions do in fact rely on there being some good faith people in there who are drinking the Kool-Aid, who believe the ideology that they're told. And there's people like that in all these bureaucracies. There's still judges in this town that think that the purpose of the criminal punishment bureaucracy is public safety.
Right.
They're drinking that Kool-Aid. And the more we can show them these contradictions, the more we can bring those people into tension with their own colleagues. And that's really important when you start fracturing internally the liberal coalition or the neoliberal coalition. Now, some of this stuff changes a little bit in a fascist environment, which is something we don't have time for, thank God, tonight.
Well, with that being the best question you've gotten on the tour, I do want to stop because there's no one's going to answer a better question than that, and myself included. So I want to thank everyone for joining us for today's Vel Phillips Forum. It was sponsored in part by Wisconsin Justice Initiative, MICA, the Kohler Foundation, the Public Welfare Foundation, Wisconsin Civic Power Table, and the Hersfeld Foundation. Once again, I want to thank all of our guests who are here tonight. We couldn't have done this without you, and everyone on the live stream. Thank you for your questions. I want to thank our production team, especially Cheston and Michaela. Thank you. Great job, guys. Our staff, wonderful interpreters at the DJC Interpreting, and of course, the great folks who support this forum. If you are interested in supporting Milwaukee Turners' work or becoming a sponsor of the Vel Phillips Forum, please visit our website, MilwaukeeTurners.org. That's MilwaukeeTurners.org. We hope you will continue this conversation by joining us for Copaganda Cactus Club Book Edition, January 7th at 5:30 p.m. in Milwaukee's Bayview neighborhood. Feel free to join us for many other events we're going to be doing across the county throughout October. You can also join us here on our social media and our website. I want everyone to give Alec a big round of applause. This is a fantastic, fantastic forum. And until next time, please take care of one another. We love you.